Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this Overseas Home webinar. Sorry about the slight delay. We're having technical hitches, one of which includes my background not changing.
So we'll be nice to the Portuguese.
Yeah. Exactly. So today we're looking at the process of obtaining a suitable visa to reside in France, which includes the associated medical insurance requirements. And we're also going to talk about healthcare options in France more generally. My name is Richard, a member of your Overseas Home content team, and I'll be hosting this session. It's great to have you all here with us, whether you're watching live or you're catching up on demand. But let me introduce you to today's specialist, the person who'll be providing us with all that valuable information, and that is Fabien Pellissier from Fab Insurance, or Fab Expat, native.
Oh, we lost Richard. Okay, well, okay, I'll try to carry up until he's back. Okay, well, so this evening, I think the goal is to speak about retiring to France and how to move to France, especially since Brexit. Whatever you're from the US, UK, there's basically the Brexit impacted the process for most of you guys. So I think we might as well deep dive straight away. The retiring to France is a process that involves, for most people, the first step is a visa, because if you want to consider to live in France long term, you need to first get a visa. There are a few exemptions, like if you're the spouse of an EU or a French citizens. But for most of you guys, if you want to exceed the 90 days allowance, then you just need to apply for a visa first. The first thing is the most important consideration to have in mind is to first apply for that visa from your country, either your country of origin or your country of nationality or residence. Sorry. So if you have multiple nationalities, you can apply for any of the country of nationalities. Or if you reside in a different country, because let's say if you reside in Belgium or whatever, it's an EU state or a non-EU state, you can also do the process from the that country. So a visa process, it often looks as a daunting process, but actually boils down to three main factors, because basically the French government just wants to make sure that you'll be safe, if you move to France. So those factors are, I like to call those the main pillars. Oh, Richard, you're back.
I'm back, yeah, hopefully to stay. So excuse me if I disappear, but I'm having serious problems with my internet today.
Yeah, no, well, we're just getting started on the visa bit, but...
Right, so, yeah, you started talking about visas and started to explain. Well, do you want to carry on where you are, and then I'll come in because
sure. Yeah. I was just basically going through the considerations to look for to retire to France, and the visa, and basically saying that the visa boils down to, I like to call them meeting three main pillars. So which are proof of income, proof of medical coverage, and proof of address. The proof of medical coverage is super easy to secure. Well, we have a company, Fab French Insurance, which has the cheapest visa battle-tested policies. We have our 100% money-back guarantee in case of visa rejections. Basically, it's a no-brainer. So it's all a matter of buying a policy, really. There is an exemption for British state pensioners, which instead of a medical insurance policy can apply for something called the S1 program, which is basically a way to avoid private medical insurance. But apart from those guys, everyone else needs to have that. Then the second pillar, the proof of income. Well, this one is either you can meet the requirement or you can't, or you cannot. But very often it's not that difficult because France is very flexible with this. Because basically you need to meet France minimum wage, which at the minute is 1,400 net a month, or could be 12 times this amount in savings. So let's say you have 0 savings, then you need 1,400 euros net a month. Or you have 0 income, and then you need, I'll round up the numbers, 12 times that number, which is roughly 17,000 in savings, euros. Or could be a mix of both. Like if you have 1,000 euros passive income, let's say, then you just need to top it up with roughly 5,000 euros in savings. So that could be a mix of both. So that's why France is quite convenient, in that regard. So, well, that's basically the real. And very quickly, but we can address David's question about, if you are, let's say, a mixed couple, like UK passport and US passport, for example, that was a question, David's questions. That doesn't affect the application. It's just that, well, for example, David apparently is British, so you could apply for the visa from the UK. And if his wife is living in the UK with him, then she also can apply from the UK as well. Or she can apply from the US, and vice versa. If David's living in the US, he can also apply in the US. So, but that doesn't make much difference because technically speaking, the rules are the same. So that doesn't really affect the visa process, apart from depending on where you apply from, but unless, it's pretty much the same. And then maybe then you can catch up, Richard, and we're getting to the other questions, but potentially.
Yeah, I think a good place to start, David, is the actual whole process of applying for a visa. So I'm imagining a lot of the audience now, they're considering, or they know they want to move to France, and they know they need to go through the visa process. So what is the best way to start the process? Come and speak to yourself, someone like yourself. And then just tell us about the different stages and what they need to do to get to the point of getting their visa.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I know you can.
Yeah, sure. We do offer these consultations. So I like to say you can see me as an immigration GP, or a general practitioner if you're not from the UK. So I can talk about a wide range of topics to kind of help you understand the bigger picture. But then basically, technically, you don't need to speak with anyone to get the process started, because in that regard, COVID actually did wonders with French bureaucracy, because a lot of things have been digitalized, which is great. And now the whole thing can be done online. So for visas, for example, it's a website called francevisa.gov.fr. For residency, it's Administration des Étrangers, but there is a website for this as well. You can even apply for French healthcare online. Although this one's a bit of a joke, because you download a PDF that you fill in and then have to send over snail mail. But still, you can start all the processes online. And again, I'm more like a guide to guide you in the way. I mean, we do offer some services to help you out if you really don't want to bother with any of this, including insurance, which this one is mandatory anyway. So, but yeah, so it's usually, it often boils down to also planning. If you plan the move correctly, there's very often a lot of opportunities as well, because first, tax-wise, France is not nearly as bad as the reputation it gets. The reputation of France is as bad rep with taxes because of social charges, but on wages. But national taxes are pretty much the same as the US or the UK. They're fairly similar. And actually, if some of you are from the US, France has a very specific tax treaty from the US, which is the best on the planet, especially if you're a retiree, because basically for retirees, pensions aren't taxed in France from the US. It's the only country. Any other countries would have a typical non-dual taxation treaty, but we have a very favorable one with the US. I think, I'm seeing quite.
Do you want to answer one of the questions? Some more of the questions?
Yeah, just Christopher was saying, do saving accounts needs to be deposited into a French bank? No, actually, it could be in GBP, could be in USD, could be in any foreign account. Obviously, if it's in a foreign-based bank account, well, then you have to consider the exchange rate. So because they'll only consider the euro rate at the date of your application, but it could be on a French bank account, obviously, an EU bank account, or any bank account, even in a non-EU currency, non-euro currency. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm right in thinking that part of the process involves going to the French consulate in the country that you reside.
Indeed. Oh, yeah. But actually, that was a good question. So yeah, actually, so you start the process online, and then you go through the process of the the online process, and you file an application online. And then once it's done, you basically file this application. And by the way, the visa application window is usually done when you're within 90 to 30 days prior to what they call the intended arrival date, so like the start date of your visa technically. And that online process, that you get started 90 to 30 days prior to intended arrival date, is then, once you file the application online, then they'll offer you an in-person appointment. So in the UK, that's a subcontractor called TLS that takes care of that. So it's not directly, it's actually the French subconsulate subcontractor. In the US, it's a contractor named VFS, but you don't have to remember about those guys because you deal with the French website, which then will liaise with these guys, and they'll offer an in-person interview in one of those, let's call them visa centers locally. There are quite a few in the US, for example. There are 3 in the UK, London, Manchester, and in Edinburgh. And you'll have to go in person there, but you don't go at the French consulate. You go to those visa centers, which then they'll collect your application and the original of your passport. This one's often overlooked because basically you're passportless for a couple of weeks because that's the average delay. And then they send the passport to the consulate for processing and the application. And if it's a pass, if it's a go, basically the visa is a new page in your passport. Okay, and then they send the passport back, and then you come and collect the passport again. That's basically the drill. So also probably answers Roger's question about how long does the visa process typically take. Depend on when you get this started, because again, you start the process online, but then you have to book the appointment. So there is like a delay. So if we count that delay, usually, depending on how busy they are, but it could be a couple of weeks until you can book an appointment. And then once you've been through the appointment, it's usually another couple of weeks until you get the visa back. So that's why at the very least, it's supposed to be a month. But again, could be much faster, could be much slower, depends on how busy they are, and also depends on your schedule, because obviously you have to book that appointment and stuff. But so this is why I'd say on average, it's safer to consider 2 months, but once you've been through the interview, it is on average a couple of weeks. Okay. Although again, at the minute in the UK, that's more like 3 weeks. And in the US, it's like a 1 week, so it really also depends on where on the planet you are. So, to be taken with a pinch of salt, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay. And we've got a question here from Ian. He says, on the French visa site, the government site, I think he means he can't find a form which classed as retiring full time. You can only see one that says business or visitors and joining family. Which is the category that's correct?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because actually it's typical French humor, I'd say, probably. Actually, yeah, there used to be a retiree visa, but they've just merged everything into the visitor visa. Basically, visitor visa is the non-working visa. So for all of you guys who won't be working, even potentially for some remote workers or sometimes business owners, although to be taken with a pinch of salt, because there also might be some tax implications, but that's a different story. Basically, if you're not working for French clients or for French companies, so basically not working in France, and even if you're operating a small rental or gîte business in France, small is less than 24,000 euros per annum, then that's probably the visitor visa. That's the one for you, which is the non-working visa. Yeah. I think, just a silly question that I've seen. Well, it's not silly, but seems something like this. Does having an Irish passport change the visa process? Well, yes, completely, because you don't need a visa. Basically, you're European, even if you've never lived there. But once you have an EU passport, then you're European. So you don't need a visa. You don't need a residence permit. It's exactly like me if I want to go to Spain or Portugal, I could just walk there. But that would be a long walk, but I could just go there. And I pretty much don't need anything. Well, sure, I'd need to register within the local authorities, get a tax code probably, and most importantly, register into local healthcare. So in your case, French healthcare. That's pretty much it.
And does the person who, there's the question here about mobility. This person said they have mobility, which she can't get to the visa centre themselves, but can their husband go to represent them, or does a person need to go in? Do they need to go themselves? Or how do you get around that?
Yeah, well, depends on the country. Usually, these subcontractors, for example, in the US, they have, it's something that you have to pay for a fee, but then they also can come to your place sometimes. Like I know they can do that. For example, VFS can do that. But basically, these guys need to see you, and not a representative. So it's either you're dealing with a contractor that do have the option. Basically, you need to get in touch with them. For example, VFS in the US can do that. Or if there is a mobility issue, you just reach out to TLS if you're in the UK, for example, or VFS in the US, and tell them about the issue, and they will sort it out. It's not the French consulate who deals with that, because it's part of the French consulate's, I'd say, specifications that that contractor sees you in person, not someone else. Has to be you.
Yeah. Okay. Another question about the actual address, your French residence for your application. Do you need to own a property, or can you rent a property? Can you be renting a property? What qualifies as a relevant address, an eligible address?
Yeah, sure. Well, technically speaking, the specifications for like visa compliant addresses, there's only one or three options. But then again, it's typically French, the theoretical word and then real life. But so theoretically, the three things which are compliant are either proof of ownership of a French building. Obviously, if you bought a French property, then you can use the proof of ownership of a French property as the proof of address. Secondly, a 1 year or 3 years, but let's say like a long-term rental contract. There's only one type of long-term rental contract in France anyway, which is not like some of you might be used to, though. It's not a 1 year. For example, if you get a 1 year rental contract in France, it's not a 1 year commitment for the tenant, for you as a tenant. That's actually, well, if it's a 1 year contract, you can walk away with a single month notice, for example. So it's easy as a tenant to walk away from a rental property. It's more like the property owner is committed to you for 1 year. That's why the French consulate sees that as safe, unlike an Airbnb, for example. And then the third option is something that is called, it's a French word, sorry, it's called an attestation d'hébergement. And basically, if you know people in France already, family, friends, acquaintances, then basically if those guys are happy with you using their address, they can write something like a sworn statement where they say they're happy having you around. They're happy with you using their address. This is also visa compliant. And I've listed all three options by, I'd say, order of, not priority, but order of interest for the French consulate. Basically, if you have a French property, that's you've built a lot of points, and that helps a lot in your file. And that attestation d'hébergement is something you can use, but like if there's anything else that tipped them off on your application, it carries less weight than, for example, should you have a French property. Again, they're all visa compliant, though, so technically they are on the same scale. But yeah, I mean, obviously, the higher up in the scale, the better. But then I'll address the indirect question of, yeah, but what about? But that's usually like when you're from the US, where it's obviously going for a run trip to France just to secure a rental accommodation might not be as convenient as if you are from the UK, where it's literally an hour or 2 hours away from your country. So although in theory it's not compliant and could change tomorrow because of a political stance that might change, but at the minute, Airbnbs may be used sometimes, again, should not, but have been used for US applicants and are usually accepted, but only for US applicants, while for other nationalities, they're usually not as flexible. And I've listed the 3 who are technically visa compliant. So wherever you're from, you should aim at any of those 3. And we can help you with that, by the way. We can help you find a rental accommodation. We can help you, hook you up with the people who can help you do that. But so basically, you're not alone with this. And we know we have ways to help you out. But basically, you should aim at one of those visa compliant options. Okay. Another interesting question from Sasha is like, if you move to France as a couple, do both people have to prove income separately? So actually, also France is very generous with couples, because whatever you married, civil partnership or just like dating, as long as you've been together for a while, let's say more than 1 year, basically, and there's a way to prove. Well, obviously, if you married a civil partnership, you have the contract. If you're not, sometimes it might just be a bit difficult to prove that. But as long as you've been together and can kind of back that up, France is happy to consider you a couple, okay? And therefore, you can use each other's supporting documents. So, for example, Mrs. or Mr. can use Mrs. bank statements or vice versa, okay? That's completely okay. You can use individual statements as well, but you can use each other's. And then in terms of requirements as well, although in theory it doesn't change anything, it's still technically 1,400 net a month per person. Technically speaking, it's supposed to be 2,800. But in real life, very often they'll apply. I mean, if you meet the requirements, and that you should try and aim at that. But very often, even if you have like 2,500, I've seen even as low as 2,000. Like if you have 2,000 a month, but are a French property owner, they very often will give it a go anyway, because like they know it will be stable for you, and you can actually live out with that. So technically speaking, you're still supposed to meet the requirements per person, but in real life, again, they're mostly trying to assess would the situation be sustainable in France. So that's why technically we could say they apply a discount as a couple, although in theory you're supposed to meet the requirement per person. So yeah, which hopefully answers the question. Yeah. And Craig was asking about the cost for health insurance. Yeah, obviously it varies. But let's say someone late 50s, like 95 years old, for example, 59 years old, 59. Oh, it's getting late. 59 years old would be a bit less than 2,000 euros per person for a whole year, 12-month coverage. And yeah, that's pretty much, and early 60s would be probably 2,200, not that much more. But yeah, it's just to give some rough idea of some kind of premiums. But again, you can have a look at our website. We have an online calculator, fabfrenchinsurance.com, and you'll have the price displayed live. I mean, we have a bunch of policies, but usually we display what's the best seller and the cheapest plan. Yeah. And when we say we're the cheapest, by the way, we even refund the difference. If you find a cheaper visa compliant policy, we know we're the best. So yeah. Yeah, that's I think that's it. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
You can hear me. Oh, that's good. Sorry, I can't actually see anything, but that's fine. So when you get your visa and you get your carte de séjour, is this something that's renewable? Talk us about what you do for the next following years after getting your visa and moving to France. How you renew your residency status?
Yeah, sure. Actually, yeah. Well, you get the visa, and then to get like the carte de séjour you've mentioned is what I call the residency permit. It's easier because actually we do have a few different names for this. Again, it's France, has to be a bit confusing, otherwise it's not funny. But yeah, so the visa is a 1 year. Is always a 1 year thing, and then you. I don't like the words like people saying renewing the visa or whatever, because for me it's confusing. Renewing a visa is possible, but that means you have to go back to your own country and reapply for a visa. So for me, it's not really renewing a visa. It's more like you convert the visa into a residence permit, which also technically is inaccurate because you don't convert it, you just apply for a residence permit. But yeah, it's just because you might see those wordings out there, and so in a way I think it's important. So, well, you convert your visa into a residence permit, which also would be a 1 year. The difference is the residence permit, you get it done from France, from a place called La Préfecture, which actually, well, you start the process online. It's exactly the same process and same requirements as for the visa, although this time is in France. And then you'll have to go through an in-person interview at La Préfecture, which will be the prefecture in your area, in your French department, as we call them. And they'll give you, well, and if it's accepted, because if you still meet the requirements, still same pillar, proof of income, proof of medical coverage, proof of address, exactly the same. Although the proof of medical coverage at this time, usually you're part of the French healthcare system, so the French social security, and very often it's for free. Well, you're part of the system now, so you no longer need private insurance. But basically, they'll give you a 1 year permit, which is renewable indeed. Well, the thing with the prefecture is that they have quite a lot of discretionary powers. So it varies massively. The average process, so to be taken with a pinch of salt, because sure, you might have heard stories of people who might have be able to do that faster or much slower. On average, the process goes as follows. You get a 1 year visa. Then when you're 9 months into your relocation, you apply for a residence permit. So within 9 to 11 months, okay, at La Préfecture. And they give you a 1 year permit. And they want to see you 2 or 3 times, okay? So they'll renew it 2 or 3 times, so 2 or 3 times a 1 year permit, so that they can build up a picture where they grew confident that your situation is stable and safe in France. And then when they get to a point, but again, could be after 1 year, like they could just renew it once and then they're like, okay, your situation's stable, fine. And then eventually they'll give you that multi-use permit, which often is a 5 years one, okay? And that 5 years one is a one-off. Well, again, very often. And basically one-off means what? Means like, well, once it's about to expire and you renew it, then they'll give you a 10 years, which is what they call the carte de résident permanent, which is the permanent permit, basically. And it's exactly like a passport, okay? Although it's like, looks like an ID card, like a driver license card, but exactly, it's a 10 years permit. And then basically this one, it's not automatically renewed like a passport, but the requirements to renew it are much easier. And by the way, there's no language test for most of you guys. There's only a language test in 3 categories. There's no language test for visas. And the language test is only for 3 types of residence permit, which are if you're the spouse of a French citizen, not the EU, but French citizen. And this case is particular because, well, then if you, hello, the bubble, if you're the French spouse of a French citizen, but you don't speak French, basically, well, you'll get a 1 year permit. It's just that if you do speak French, that's why there's a French test, you'll get a multi-use permit straight away. Second scenario where you have a French test is when you're the parent of a French citizen and applying for a visa, well, for a residence permit as the parent of a French citizen. And then it's something called the family reunion residence permit. So usually, apart from the spouse of a French citizen, that doesn't apply to you. And so there's no such thing as a French test basically for you. And also, if you're more than 65 years old, there's no French test, even if you're within one of those categories.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's another question here about being refused a visa. I know we mentioned that not having the right medical insurance is a common reason. What other reasons might mean someone gets rejected? And the second part is if you've already bought your property hoping to move to France, I mean, is there a way you can move things along and you do get rejected after owning a property? Is there a way around that?
Well, actually, it's a very good question because I'll start with if you bought a property in France first. If you bought a property in France, basically we're dealing with more than 1,500 visas a year, and I've been in business since 2015. Obviously, with British expats, this is more recent. The visa stuff, but I've pretty much never seen an application being denied for a French property owner. Okay, that's why I was saying it sits on top of the list. Although in theory it doesn't change anything, but I think it does make a difference at the consulate, because if you have bought a property in France, in a way, it doesn't guarantee the visa. But again, I've basically never seen an application being denied for a French property owner. So, although it's technically possible that a visa gets rejected if you have a property in France, I've never seen the case. And we deal with more than 1,000 a year, like literally almost thousands with an S. But so, and so what are the reasons why a visa is rejected? There's quite a few that we see often. Well, first, I mean, when I say often, as like we probably see something like 20, 30 rejections a year, with people usually dealing with their applications themselves. But again, over thousands of applications. So it's still kind of marginal, although we do see rejections every month. The main reasons, resources, it needs to be available cash. Like if you show them letters of like the value of your property portfolio, whatever, that's not something you can instantly access. Basically, the money should be accessible like this afternoon or tomorrow. So if it's not, or if it's something, also bear in mind, well, although the guys you'd be dealing with is probably going to be a subcontractor who might be British or American, well, basically same as you. But then the file is being handled over to the French consulate, and those guys probably would be French. So, an ISA or a 401k if you're in the US, those guys don't know what this is. This doesn't exist in France. So sometimes you might be providing them with documentation that they simply don't understand. So it's just important to make sure that you're making that dump simple to understand. So, but this is a motive for rejections sometimes. And by the way, point blank rejection is basically not a thing. Usually they tell you if something is wrong, and you may have the opportunity to fix this. Okay, so but yeah, so financial resources is a rejection. Well, this morning again, we've had a rejection for insurance. Improper insurance is one of the main leading factor of rejections, because you bought like a 3-month or a 6-month policy, or you bought travel insurance, or there's quite a few reasons why they might be denied. So it's actually a main cause for rejections. And then the third case is actually the address as well, like improper. For this one, usually the motive they give you is quite blurry, but it's something like we don't think you'd be staying in France, or you have a stable enough accommodation in France. So these are the 3 leading causes for rejections. There are quite a few. It could be as many as there are different types of applications. We've even seen an application of someone. Because you have to provide them with ID pictures, because again, this is a new page, a new passport, and you'll have your picture in there. Again, it's an official document. And someone once provided them with a selfie picture of himself on the beach, which you can guess is not visa compliant. So, well, the case for rejections are plenty, but like the most common are the 3 I've just mentioned. Yeah.
Okay. This is quite an interesting question from Henry. He says, once he's got his visa to live in France, and I guess that means you are then resident in France, how can you go backwards and forwards between France and the UK? What are the rules? I guess that depends on where you are tax resident, or where you, how flexible is your movement between France and the UK?
Actually, France at the minute is probably the most flexible countries in the European Union, because, well, if we're being honest, I'll get straight to the point. All that France cares about is that you're filing your taxes in France. Even if you're tax exempt, as long as you're filing your taxes there, the French government will be happy with that. Okay, so you can be in and out as often as you like. France doesn't care. Then, yeah, well, I mean, but you were correct to say that the visa is exactly like a residency permit, but then you might have that and be like a second homeowner, or don't want to become a French tax resident. So if you don't, well, then that means you don't, well, you can't exceed 183 days a year in France, but then, you can be in and out. I mean, you can even, I've had people who've had a visa and then changed their plans and actually never come to France. Then it doesn't change anything. It's just a bit silly, because you would have wasted time and money to get a visa and it's useless, but you have absolutely no obligations. And should you like to renew the visa in 1 year's time, that doesn't jeopardize your chances to renew it, because you wouldn't have used one. So France is super flexible in that regard. There's basically no particular restriction, apart from the obvious one of, if you consider yourself a French resident, that means you're also a tax resident. That means you're filing taxes. And don't get me wrong with this one, also to demystify this. Yes, year one, you probably won't be filing taxes. Okay. That's why at the visa center, they'll have you sign a letter saying that you intend to be filing your taxes in France, like eventually. Okay. But obviously, when the tax season comes, and once you've lived in France for more than 1 year, so it's probably going to be actually in 1 year and a half, or maybe in 2 years' time, depending on where we actually move. Okay. But basically, from a French angle, all they care about is that you consider French your country of tax residence, and you file your taxes there.
And I guess the thing to point out is that the tax here in France runs in line with the calendar year, doesn't it?
Yeah. 1st of January
to the 31st of December. The UK. So you've got to have been in France more than 183 days. You've got to have been there after whatever it is, the end of June, or to be there half the year anyway. So
that's exactly that.
Yeah.
But the tax season is same as the UK, for example, because you file the taxes in May.
Yeah.
But to be I'd say eligible. It's not exactly the lottery, but yeah. So you have to have been in France 183 days or more the year before. But I mean, in some scenarios, if you have a business, if you have a property, well, you might still be filing taxes and paying taxes straight away. If you've had a property in France, you have to pay taxes from day one, property taxes, So there are quite a few different options and scenarios, but basically to simplify this, yes, you need to have been 183 days per calendar year, and you file the taxes, like the tax returns, in May. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good question here about the order of actually moving to France and how you do things regarding your UK property. Cheryl's asking, they need to sell their UK house to move to France, and I imagine buy a new home. So they can't apply for their visa. Maybe they need the money from that as well as part of their visa process. So what's the best order? Is it, well, I imagine you need to sell your UK home, get the money in the bank, and then you can start the process of visa and buying your French home, or can you apply for the?
Well, I mean, technically speaking, again, when considering France, you're not in jail, so every option is an option you can contemplate. However, it is correct that this order, like selling the UK, well, your property in your home country, then having the money on your bank account and then moving to France, is often the timeline that people will decide to go for, and also for a good reason, which is a tax reason, because if you do that, you also remain that property, for that example, in the UK remains the main property when you sell it, which means you don't have to pay capital gains on it, and then you can move to France, and it's also a tax efficient process, I'd say. Whereas if you move to France first and sell the property next, and obviously you're making profits on it, then you'd have to pay capital gains on the sale of that property. So because it would have become a second home, and whatever this property was in the UK, the US, or anywhere, it's the same regulation everywhere on the planet. So
yeah.
So hopefully it answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think so. And if you want to keep your house in the UK, this is another question. As an investment, so I'm guessing they're going to rent it out and then move to France and own a house in France, which becomes your main residence, your primary residence. Will I pay tax in both the UK and France?
Actually, yeah, very good, because so first, important to know that France has, well, I prefer to call that non-dual taxation treaties. with pretty much every English-speaking countries. And that means you can never end up paying twice for the same source of income, okay? So that means the country where you're supposed to be paying less taxes won't be topping up the missing tax revenue. So it's one source of income is only taxed in one country. And for properties, it's always taxable in the country where the property sits, basically. So if you do have a UK home and rent it out, but live in France and you're a French main taxpayer, let's say that's your country of your tax residence, then, well, you'd be paying taxes in France on other sources of income or dividends or whatever. But on that rental income that you may have in the UK, then you'd have to pay the taxes in the UK. So technically, you'd be paying taxes on both sides of the channel, however, on different income streams as well. Okay, and well, don't forget though that you have to declare all your sources of income in the country of main residence. So in that instance, France. So when you live in France, even for income streams that aren't taxed or taxable in France, you still need to declare those and file those on your national taxes in France. Again, they won't be taxed if they're not supposed to be, but you need to file those because there's a tax logic in it, because it does increases your total household income. And should you have any sources of income, potentially it may increase your tax brackets. So if you don't declare your sources of income, even if they're tax-free in France, well, technically it's tax fraud because you're supposed to declare all the sources of income. Again, if you're not due taxes in France, they won't apply any taxes. But then this way, France knows about your household income and potentially impacts other sources of income taxation rates.
Okay, so yeah, basically you have to pay tax in the country where you rent the property out, but you won't pay it again in your country of residence, which will be France.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you still need to declare that revenue in France.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Here's a good question. Alan, who moved to France at the start of 2021 and got his 5-year residence permit, but he had to come back to the UK because of family commitments. I'm guessing he means the same year. And he stayed in the UK since then. So that was 4 years ago. But now he wants to go back to France permanently next year, which will be 2025. Is the residency permit, a 5-year residency permit, still valid?
Yeah, it still is. Well, unless informed otherwise, well, maybe something happened, but unless informed otherwise, yes, the residence permit is still valid. Not having been in France, usually don't have much. Well, it depends on when, but like if you still have a couple of years if he still has a couple of years on his permit, that's probably going to be fine. The main consequence that may occur here is that it goes with the renewal of the residence permit. So, for example, you have a 5 years permit. You've been 4 years out of France, and then you're back on the last year, and then you go at the prefecture to renew it, but then you don't have a French tax code. You haven't filed your taxes in France because you've been away. They won't like this, so they may revert your residence permit to a 1 year. Like you may go back, down the process in a way. So, but technically, it doesn't jeopardize anything. It doesn't change anything again. So, and it's probably still valid again, unless informed otherwise by the French authorities. It is probably still valid.
Because I know in some countries you have to spend a minimum number of days every year.
That's what I'm saying. France is quite flexible at the minute. It's probably the most flexible country.
Do they track? They don't track the number of days you're in and out of the country. Then
not yet.
Not yet. Oh, not yet. But no.
But there's an upcoming regulation called the ETIAS in the European Union, in the Schengen zone. So, well, supposedly 1st of January. I don't think they'll be ready. Supposed to be completely operational 1st of July, but basically it's upcoming. It's like the British ETA or the US ESTA,
Yeah, and that will be a digital tracking system, won't it? Where it will.
That would be exactly. But for now, it's not operational. So yeah, I mean, it's the good old stamps on the passport for now.
Yeah, that's what we like. Yeah. So the answer is hopefully, and he should be okay at the moment. if he goes
Yeah, I mean,
back
at the moment,
but be
it's
prepared
basically
to.
about renewal that it might have an impact. But in terms of being legally able to come back to France, again, unless informed otherwise, yes.
And we've had a few questions about casual work and part-time work. If you move to France with a visa, long-term stay visa, are you allowed to do casual work, part-time work, or what sort of visa do you need to do that?
Actually, the visa is the key factor here, because like the type of visa you've applied for, like we've mentioned the visitor visa, which is basically the non-working one. So if you move to France with a non-working visa, well, technically you're not allowed to work. There's some scenarios or some situations where you might be operating a business with a visitor visa or remote working. But like the rule of thumb is like if you want to work locally, like for a French business or for French clients, it's almost, well, it's certain that you can't use a non-working visa. You need to have a work compatible visa. It used to be easy, or easier at least, because you can change the reason for the stay. Like, well, you can have a non-working visa and decide to switch onto working, okay? And it used to be much easier. Like last year, 2023 was much easier, but I think there's some people may have abused the system. So nowadays, and again, depends on the prefecture. Some prefecture, if you do change from the first year, if you do change from a non-working to a working situation, they may tell you to go back to your home country and reapply for the right type of visa. And sometimes it's a walk in the park, and then super happy with this. So usually, if you do intend to work, this is something that has changed. So again, a year ago would have been the same. My advice would be to try to apply for a work compatible visa. Then I know a few options, but then it depends on exactly what you like to be doing. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Another question here from Carl. As a retired person moving to France, are you required to pay social taxes?
Okay, so this is a bit of a tricky
Retired,
question in a way, because this is a bit of a filler word in French. I'd say social charges or social taxes, because for example, I do pay social charges on my wage, but that's around 80%. So like to pay myself €1,000 wage, I pay €800 taxes, social charges. Well, then if you draw down dividends, you have a flat rate taxation rate, not whatever you're French or an expat, and that's called social charges, social taxes. But that's a much different rate. It's 30%. And if you're a French retiree, they do indeed have something called the CSG, which is also social charges, but varies from, depends on how much you're making. Like, could be 10, 12, 14%. So, well, those are different rates. And this is exactly the same word. So for the same word, it have different things. So also depends on the type of income you have. So again, as I was saying, if you're from the US, no, it's tax-free. If you're from the UK, it depends if you have, for example, a pension from the force, or as a public worker, would remain tax liable in the UK and therefore wouldn't be taxed in France. If it's another sort of pension, that would then be taxable in France. But public pensions and private pensions aren't also processed the same. So it's difficult for me to answer this in a broad way, and most importantly, to be specific, like what kind of taxation rate might apply. And that's the kind of question where usually I'll say, well, speak with a tax lawyer, and because we do have one we partner with, and we're more than happy to introduce you with. But it's very specific to one's individual situation. So on average, the short answer is there's probably going to be some taxes to be paid. But then also, depending on how much you're making, again, household income, it also changes the rate. So it needs to get into the specifics of one situation.
Okay. Just staying on the working again in France, there's an interesting question from, I think she must be a lawyer, but she's asking if she moved to France and worked remotely, for clients who were in the UK, could you do that on a visitor visa? Or is there such thing as a digital nomad visa in France? Or
Oh yeah, no, we don't have that. And well, also depends on the whatever you operate as. As it's the UK, if you operate as an LTD in the UK or self-employed, because that wouldn't be seen the same, in France. Basically, if you're a managing director or a self-employed in France, in the UK. So technically speaking, yes, you can move to France with a visitor visa. But there are some tax implications, which maybe you would be better and actually more tax efficient to, for example, register as a self-employed in France and invoice your British business to actually legally work in France. But if you do that, then it's no longer a visitor visa. It's no longer a non-working visa. Then you'd be looking at the business type of visa. Or maybe, I don't know if you're employed as well. Maybe you're employed. Then maybe you're looking at something like the portage salarial, which is detached worker kind of situation. Or there are quite a few different options on the table. That's typically, as it calls for a consultation with me, so that we can get into the specifics. So the short answer is it's technically doable, but as there are some tax implications, you don't want to end up in a situation where, I mean, again, legally speaking, you can move to France with a visitor visa as a digital nomad, and even if you're a managing director. But maybe you'll end up in a situation where you end up paying quite a lot of French taxes because you wouldn't have gone through the process, which is the most tax efficient for you. So these are the type of situation where, yeah, there's what you can do, which might be different from what you should be doing, because you don't want to end up paying crazy amount of taxes. Because if you considered potentially a detached worker, well, maybe the social charges, same as my wage, may fall back on you. So you don't want that to happen. So again, but it's mostly a tax issue. So technically speaking, the answer would be yes, it's doable. Might not be the best solution, but it's doable.
Yeah. The feeling I'm getting is a lot of people who want to move to France and almost semi-retired, so they want to keep a bit of work remotely or an investment, or keep it going for income or extra income, and they're not. There seems to be this area where they're not quite sure.
There's also, I mean, you're right to mention this, because there's also, it depends on how long you intend on doing this, because very often there's also like a 5 years tolerance, depending on what your plans are, if you're transitioning into another stage of your life, for example. So yeah, again, that's why it really depends.
Another interesting one here, which is made me think of this, is from Jane. She's got a long stay visa, non-working, but she's a retired author, and she's asking if one of my books got published suddenly, or not suddenly, or when it does get published, then she's going to start taking income royalties from it. What happens?
This is it's actually a very good example, because when I'm saying it is super specific, this particular case, well, then she'd be getting royalties or something like this, I suppose, and then she'd fall into the author and artist category, which is a specific category in France. So that's what I'm saying. It really gets very specific to one situation, which is seen as different. I mean, yes, technically that would be seen as such, but I wouldn't. That's also a different type of visa, because there is an artist or authors. There are different categories. There is a passport talent for that, which is yet another type of permit. There's also a visa for that. This is not a source for concern, because it's not the same as if you started working for a French company, for example.
Yeah.
So
you're not openly going to look for work
exactly
and go against what your visa is classified as. It's almost incidental.
So technically speaking, she's right. I mean, it would count as work, or ever. It's more like it would count as income tied to work she would have been doing. So and again, that's why we have a specific situation for artists and authors, because it's we know it's different. It's not the same industry as if you are on a wage.
Sure. Good. Just very quickly, there's been a bit of confusion about the order of applying for your visa in the journey of buying a home. Someone's asked, if you went to France for 90 days without a visa, which you're allowed to do, and you found a house and you wanted to buy it and I guess stay there, would you have to come back to the UK to actually apply for the visa? I think the answer is yes, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, the answer is yes. And also, if you're buying a property, well, typically the French process takes like 90 days, plus or minus a couple of weeks, but on average, it's a 90 days process. And so towards the end of the process, so basically, it's usually, again, well, it may vary, but usually it's a 3 steps process. The first step is, well, basically you put down an offer in writings, which is called the promesse de vente. And then again, may vary, but typically the process is you put down an offer, which is a promesse de vente. It's not really legally binding. And then you go to someone called a notary notaire in France. And then you sign a compromis de vente, which is more legally binding. And then you start a cool-off period, and then you'd have break clause and stuff. But don't worry. But then basically that's when the 90 days process starts. And at the end of the process, then you signed the acte de vente, which is when the property is actually yours. Once it's signed, it's yours. And the notaire at this stage, the notary will then give you a document called the acte de vente authentique, which is basically, we say, the apostilled acte de vente. And this is the only document that you can use for visa purposes. So you need to have seen the whole purchase through, okay? So yes, you need to come back to the UK, but also to have that document before you actually book an interview, because you'll need that document for applying to the visa.
Yeah. So the answer is yeah, you need to come back with it. Yeah. Another quick question about pensions. We are running out of time, or we're actually over time, but we had a bit of a disrupted start, so I think we have another couple of minutes. Pensions, if you're receiving a private pension or a state pension, you can get them paid into a UK bank account and then you can transfer them to France, or is there a way the French prefer you to have your pensions paid? Should they be paid direct to your French account, or does it not matter as long as you declare the income correctly?
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually the answer is in the question. As long as you declare this, it's completely okay. Well, you can do as you see fit, can draw that down onto a British bank account, a French bank account. It doesn't matter. I mean, actually, well, I'd say my advice is it's rather a currency issue, currency exchange issue, rather than, because I mean, in terms of legally speaking, France doesn't care, well, as long as you file your taxes accordingly, we don't care about that. But it does have some exchange rates implications. Sorry.
Yeah, and obviously, if you do have it paid into a UK account, you at least have the control of the exchange rate as well, because if you're getting it to be paid,
because otherwise you don't know when they'll trigger the debit and stuff. Yeah.
And then of course you can then speak to Smart Currency Exchange and you can arrange payment schedules for contracts and actually create a system where you can budget properly and have more control over the exchange rate or minimize your exposure. So
exactly.
Okay. Let's have one more question, and that was there it is. It's Tim. He says he's moving to France with family. Might be a brother or a sister, but 2 families. Both parties are selling properties, and then they're moving to France, I'm guessing, into one property. If we've sold one of the UK properties, and then they move and they buy in France, and then sell the second property, which belonged to one half of the part of the family, is that liable for capital gains tax?
Okay.
I would probably think if whoever owned that property, if they've already moved to France with a new address as their primary residence, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
in the UK is then a second property.
Yeah, I like to see that kind of question the other way around, because again, it is super simple, unless you're shaving your taxes or something, but it is very simple. If you leave and if you've started a visa, like the start date is, let's say, 1st of January, and you move into that property on the 1st of January, and you have a visa that got started on the 1st of January, let's say 2025. But then you have a property transaction that's, I don't know, in February 2025. you have legal documentation that confirms you've changed your main address before selling that property. So it's no longer your main address, and therefore is should be up for capital gains taxes. So for me, that's the answer. I was like, the reality of your situation is the answer. Like, if you've moved away from the property, it's no longer your main property. However, maybe some people may come up with clever schemes which might not be caught by the state or something, but that we're talking about something completely different here. Legally speaking, when you moved away from your property, it's no longer your main property, and therefore, should you sell it, is up for capital gains.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you've got.
So it's a politician answer. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I think the key thing is you've got to be very, very careful about the timing of all these things.
No.
Otherwise, if you want
timing is key. Yeah.
to be completely safe, you sell both and then move.
Yeah. Oh, actually, when you say timing, well, when I say timing is key, for example, one of the best examples for this would be, it's a random example, but timing and planning is key. Like ISAs, investment plans in the UK. If you draw it on from the ISA, if you've had it for a few years, if you draw it on from this, well, it's going to be for free. It's like you want to have to pay taxes on that. And then if you transfer that money into France, that's also a tax-free event. So basically, if you do that before moving to France, it's a completely tax-free event. But if you move to France and France doesn't recognize ISAs, it's a UK tax-efficient scheme. It's not a French tax-efficient scheme. Then once you've moved to France, if you then draw it on from the UK and say, yeah, that's a British plan, it's tax-free. No, it was tax-free when you were a British resident. It's no longer tax-free when you are a French resident. And therefore is up for capital gains or taxes now. So it could be a tax-free event if planned and anticipated, or could become a nightmare just because you didn't think about that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point.
Nightmare. So it's just one of those examples. And the bright side here, guys, is that when planning ahead, very often, actually, France, well, from the US, definitely is a tax haven because like a lot of stuff isn't taxed. And from the UK, we have quite a lot of very efficient schemes. Well, obviously, France and the UK are much closer to one another. So a lot of things are doable from the UK, which would be very tax efficient investment plans and stuff like this. So quite a lot of our British, and almost all, unless those who have more than a 1.5 million property portfolio in the UK. But everyone I know from the UK who moved to France ended up paying less taxes in France. Okay. So actually, that's probably the best bottom line I can come up with.
That's a really nice place to end as well. Just on the timing of things, I think, does it not apply as well if you want to take out your tax-free lump from a pension? I think in the UK we allow it, but in France it's a similar thing.
Yeah, but if you did that before you moved,
yeah,
that's what I'm saying. If you did that before, it's good. Then the whole process would be tax-free. Drawing down from the UK pension, moving the money across, it's all a tax-free event. But if you do that once you're in France, it becomes a tax liable event. So it's not the end of the world, and obviously France will not cut your pension in half or whatever. But it's a bit of a shame to not have anticipated on this because you had the tax opportunity, and that's a bit of a shame to have missed it. That's what I'm saying.
Might leave a bit of a bad taste in your mouth for a day or two.
Exactly. Well, you don't want to give money away to the government. It's probably way better in your pockets.
Okay, we are over now, so we'll have to end it here. Thank you very much, everyone who's tuned in and listened. I hope it's been useful. I'm sorry about the technical glitches, and you can't actually see my face, but that's probably a good thing. Thank you if you're watching on the recorded version as well. I hope it's useful. Contact Fabian. We're really lucky to have him speaking and giving up his time and sharing all this really valuable information. I've learned lots. So do get in touch with him about insurance, relocating, visas. He's ready and waiting. Fabian, thank you very much as well to you. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Thank you. And just a quick request to our audience as well. If you found this webinar useful, we'd really appreciate it if you leave us a review on the review website Trustpilot. It all helps. Otherwise, good luck with your plans to move to France. Thank you for watching and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you guys. Bye.